Johnny Mac, football at 4. Of course, every day at this time we talk NFL, we talk Eagles. This Patriots investigation. We got to get into this. We got the headlines coming up. Casey Joyner a little bit later on as well. Eagles, Cowboys, as many people – actually, I can't say many people. There were a lot of people that thought the Eagles were going to lose to the Giants, and then that same lot of people thought that they would lose to the Redskins, and now here they are playing Dallas. And I said I think they'll beat Dallas and then lose to the Giants. That would be the way this season would go, right?
Yeah, that'd be icing on the cake.
And then you just said you think Dallas is going to win, so I don't know where you stand with this game.
Let's bring John in and get a couple thoughts on yesterday's game and what goes on moving forward here, John. As we know, it was real. And by the way, we really haven't talked enough about this, that Carson Wentz really, as much as he was getting ripped for a couple of games, if not for Carson Wentz, they don't win that game yesterday.
No question. He's been tremendous, really. 2 consecutive games in fourth quarter and overtime against the Giants. He's really stepped up in the biggest situations, and that's been one of the critics' biggest weapons against him. Now, I think it's fair to point out that these are not great teams, and the Eagles are having to fight tooth and nail to beat really bad football teams. But they've gotten it done, so there's something to say for that. There really is.
Yeah, and obviously he's doing it with, a limited amount of weapons here. But why is it, in your opinion, that with all the guys out, that all of a sudden his play has kind of improved? Because there's no question he was struggling a little bit. And, I mean, even though he was playing with guys that he was more comfortable with, the guys that he has now, why are we seeing a better Carson Wentz when he has lesser talent?
Well, I think there's the assumption that lesser talent is automatically performs lesser, which is not necessarily the case. And I point to Greg Ward as a perfect example. Yeah, from a physical standpoint, and this is why the draft is a crapshoot. This is why the draft is difficult. If you were just better as a football player because you're faster, you're stronger, you got a better box jump, whatever you want to throw out there, things would be pretty easy to figure everything out. Greg Ward has performed. More talented players, and I put that in air quotes, have not performed in key situations. And we talk about all the early season big drops from this team at the wide receiver position. Think about the Atlanta game. How different is it if that football is caught? Think about the Detroit game. How different is it if that football is caught? Time and time again, late in games. And remember, around this league, there's a lot of one-score games in the NFL. So it's often 2 or 3 plays that decide it down the stretch of games. 2 or 3 plays of going up and rising up in the end zone and catching the football versus not doing it often tells the tale between victory and defeat. Guys are making plays. They might be less talented, but they're making plays.
I just joked with the guys, John, that I think I'm joking that the Eagles will probably be 11-4 right now if Aguilar just caught that ball against Atlanta. I think I'm kidding, but I'm not 100% sure that I am.
Yeah, you don't know. I mean, you don't know. I think the perfect example of that. No, I don't think you should laugh at that because you go back to the Super Bowl year, 61-yard field goal. That's when that season took off. Mm-hmm. One play. That's when it absolutely took off. And there was no assumption by anyone. There was not even an inkling that might be a Super Bowl team. In fact, they were leaking oil against the New York Giants. They were collapsing in that game. And all of a sudden, you get the sideline pass to Alshon Jeffrey. Jake Elliott hits a 61-yard field goal, energized the whole team, and they took off. I don't think that's a crazy statement. I don't know if that's the way it would have ended up, but
well, let me ask you this, John. We discussed this. If the Eagles had beaten Atlanta and Detroit, just those 2 games, and they were 9-5 right now, and everything else has gone exactly the same way, they just won those 2 games, they would have started 5-0, but everything, and they were 9-5 right now. Do you think that anybody would feel any differently about this team at 9-5 with those 2 wins as opposed to 7-7 with everything the way everything has played out?
Yeah, I think people would feel differently because the NFC East would essentially be theirs, number one, so they'd be a playoff team. But I think there would be a little bit of a disappointment from where the projections were before the season. Everyone thought they were a legitimate Super Bowl contender. But I do think the feeling would be better if they were division champions, clearly headed to the playoffs. People would say at that point you'd go, maybe Lane Johnson can get healthy. Maybe Nelson can get out there. Maybe Jordan Howard can come back. And who knows what you can do in the playoffs. I think there would be more expectation at least.
John, you've been, when talking about the run game, you've been pretty vocal about how key of a role Jordan Howard is in this offense. And, you look at yesterday and the game that Miles Sanders had, and it seems like he's now able to be the workhorse, air quotes, of this team. What did you see yesterday? Are you changing your mind a little bit about Miles, or is that just, not saying you never thought he wasn't capable of what he did yesterday, but is he coming along maybe quicker than you thought?
Well, he's coming along, and I think that's what I tweeted today, and I always use that Jim Schwartz saying startup costs.
You can't reference Jim Schwartz around here. You're going to get in trouble.
Don't do it, John.
He always says that term young players are going to struggle. And they're going to make mistakes. And if they're talented, you live with it, and they learn from mistakes because it's tough, especially in today's world. It's tough to duplicate game environments in practice. It's impossible, in fact. So the easiest way to learn is by doing it. And he struggled early in the season, especially running the football. Tried to bounce everything outside. Didn't take what was there, wasn't patient enough, and let his blocking develop. And he's getting better and better and better. And you saw a big explosion. It's never been any doubt when he gets in the open field, he's got that extra gear. But I think as a whole, I'd rather have the complement of Jordan Howard and Miles Sanders. I think that was developing. That twosome was the identity of this offense post Deshaun Jackson. They kind of lost it, and now they're trying to get it back with this new grouping. And they've done a good job. But again, you also have to be realistic. It's bad opponents, and they're fighting tooth and nail. They need overtime to beat the Giants. They need a big drive late to beat the Redskins. Maybe you're impressed. I'm not that impressed. I expected them to win these two games, and I've said it consistently. I expected Week 16 to be essentially for the NFC East title. I expected him to be here. I didn't expect it to be this difficult, to be honest.
Real quick, on what a little bit bouncing off of that, how do you see them reincorporating Howard and Aguilar if they are ready to come back this week? Whose role gets squashed with Aguilar returning? Whose role gets diminished with Howard returning? Do they change the look of the run game? I think there's a lot of very interesting questions that kind of bounce up with those two guys being potentially ready to come back.
Well, I think it's easier with Nelson. He just steps in for J.J. I think you leave Greg Ward alone, and Nelson would play outside. J.J. was awful yesterday, and I've defended him and pointed out that the Eagles probably should have pulled the trigger on him, played him earlier. He is not helping my case with yesterday's performance. And even if you look at the game... Does
that mean Robert Davis stays and JJ sits?
Well, Robert barely played. I think he played 14 snaps. So it's pretty clear that he wasn't part of it. And you look at the Washington Redskins. This Eagles offense is just 100 screens. I think they're going to set an NFL record for screenplays. So, we'll see if Chris Richard and Rod Marinelli can figure that out. They have no confidence in anybody outside, with the exception of Greg Ward, who I joked. He was on the practice squad 4 weeks ago. He's 4 weeks and he's wide receiver 1. That's what he is. It's unbelievable how bad this wide receiver group has been. So Nelson, he steps right back in. Miles has earned the right to be a big part of this offense. So, and plus Jordan's been out for so long, I think that's more of a sticky situation. You also have to, I mean, the guy hasn't been clear for contact for, this will be the 6th week. So I'm not sure if he'd be ready for 25 touches anyway.
Couple questions offensively, John. One, and it goes back to something we talked about last week, but now we have a second game to evaluate it on. Do you feel that Carson plays a little bit more carefree without Alshon, as if he's not feeling the weight of anything going on, whether it's internal or external, or just the fact that he knows he's got, that's what he's got. The hand that he's dealt, just go out there and play. And two, because the offense has been built now around a lot of screens and swing passes and short stuff, do you think that has helped Carson see the field better because it's forced him to kind of throw into the flats and underneath more?
Well, on the first, I think that's an interesting point. I've thought about it a lot, and I compare it to Eli Manning early in his career. If you remember, the best players on the Giants were Jeremy Shockey and Tiki Barber.
And they hated him.
Yeah, and they hated Eli Manning, and they were these giant personalities, and the Giants got rid of them, and they got killed for it at the time. And it was the old take a step back to take 2 steps forward. It worked out for them. If that's the case, that Carson is worried about Alshon Jeffrey, worried about making him happy, worried about the rumblings of him talking to certain national reporters, yeah, they got to get rid of him. They got to get him out of here. I mean, that's number one. Yeah, Alshon.
Yeah. Hey, I mean, you could make a legit argument if the quarterback's that sensitive, you got to get rid of him too.
But number two, and then the bigger part, if I'm Carson Wentz, and I just signed that contract, I'm clearly the face of the franchise. I don't give a what Alshon Jeffrey says. But everybody's personality is different. Right. So if he is taking it that way, and that's where Doug and Howie, they understand that building better than anyone. If that's the case, Alshon's gone, and he should be gone.
John, talk about what having a guy like Greg Ward in the huddle means for Carson Wentz. With his quarterback history and his knowledge of routes and the playbook, or is that overblown?
Yeah, I talked about it. I think for Greg, that's more of a positive than for Carson. He does have a better understanding of what quarterbacks want, and every quarterback is different. And they want you to be in certain spots in certain areas. So he has a better feel than most receivers from his extensive history playing quarterback. But I don't think that's really impactful for Carson. I think that's more of an advantage for Greg because he understands what the quarterback wants. A lot of receivers just don't have that experience.
It seems that today, I don't know, this bothers me so much when these guys just can't come out and say, hey, we made a mistake, guys. Is that okay? Are we allowed to make a mistake? He's asked about Ward, and he said it's a tricky situation because this guy's on the practice squad, and if there's an injury over here and that guy comes – no. You couldn't figure out that Mac Hollins should be down and this guy should be up, or there was no need to bring in Jordan Matthews. You had this guy here already. Why can't they just say, look, we got one wrong, and now we're happy that we got it right?
Well, I'll say this. I mean, no NFL team wants to admit they got it wrong, so I don't have a problem.
But these people act like they are right. Like they try to act like they're right 100% of the time. They can never just say
they do. They do. There's some haughtiness there.
Right.
I don't think there's any question. But I will say, and this is not the day that people want to hear this, it's Greg Ward. I mean, he shouldn't be on this team, and he shouldn't. I got news for you. If we fast forward to 2020,
is he better than Paul Turner?
Yes, he's better than Paul Turner. But I said if we go to 2020 and Greg Ward is one of the 3 starting receivers, they did something wrong. They did something wrong. That's how rock bottom you are. That people are holding on to this guy and saying, "Wow, we got Greg Ward." No, No, he's not an NFL level receiver. Did a nice job yesterday. But if you look at other teams and you look at what they're rolling out at wide receiver, you can't move forward with Greg Ward, maybe as a fifth receiver. I mean, so to say they made a mistake, yeah, he should have made the team over Matt Collins. Yeah, he should have been playing of Jordan Matthews. But they have to revamp that whole position. They need multiple bodies. And Greg Ward can't be one of them. He can't. I'm sorry. People are going to kill me for that today, but that's just what it is.
Who are you going to defend more? Less Ward or defend Schwartz? Because you'll get killed for both.
I always defend Jim. I get killed for defending Jim. Our Jim's one of the best 5 defensive coordinators in football. And I always say, look, you can fire a guy. Who are you bringing in that's better?
We were talking about that earlier.
Hey, look, I'm not even like an anti-Schwartz guy. Like I have no problem with Jim Schwartz being the defensive coordinator of the football team.
Hear me out, John. I had a radical idea. A radical idea that Jim Schwartz and only the Eagles would reinvent the wheel this style, that they would make, say, Rex Ryan the road game defensive coordinator and Jim Schwartz would be the home game defensive coordinator. Right?
Well, I'll say this. Yeah, they've been bad. I wouldn't say consistently, but they have a lot of bad spots on the road defensively, and they have through the whole era. And look, when you compare the NFL to other major sports, I think coaching is way more important in the NFL than, say, baseball, basketball. You have to talk to Pete Thompson about hockey. I have no idea, but it's way more important. But while I say that, I mean, it's still the personnel. It's still the guys on the field. I know everybody's looking at Terry McLaurin, and they're saying 2 things. Oh, you could have drafted him instead of Jay. That's number 1. And number 2, Avonte Maddox, make a simple tackle. And that's hey, you might complain about an 18-yard gain, but how is that Jim Schwartz's fault? Make a tackle. And, oh, by the way, when you miss the tackle, don't take out your other player in line to make the tackle.
Hey, speaking of defense.
I mean, that was a bad play by Avonte Maddox.
Indeed.
It's not like I mean, people want to blame things on people, and I get it. They always want to assess blame. Hey, they were killing Doug earlier this season. Now look at what Doug Peterson is doing with Greg Ward and Josh Perkins and Rob Davis and Boston Scott. Now he's a genius again. Now, he's the same guy. Same guy. Guys are performing. Boston Scott is doing better than the players before him. Greg Ward is doing better than the players before him. Guys are executing. The offensive line has always been good. They're just playing better. The coaches haven't changed.
Hey, John, I know when Howie gave up a 4th-round pick for Genard Avery, that was very much for the future. But it seems strange that he kind of had some success on. It feels like kind of the Golden Tate of defense this year, in that they probably could figure out a way to use him a little bit more, but they're not. They're kind of lining him up here and there instead of just putting him on the edge and saying rush the passer. Yeah,
well, they did. They did say it was about the future early,
right? But it doesn't mean they can't use him.
No, and I have used him a little bit.
Yeah,
hasn't been was not successful yesterday. It's interesting when they first got him because he was a linebacker and really a hybrid guy. Looks like a linebacker, but Eagles play 4-3 as a defensive end. And Jim said he's clearly an edge defender. Then he showed up one week and got a snap at linebacker. Yesterday was a joker inside, stand-up, which did not work even remotely, by the way. And they have been moving him around.
Yeah, so much for learning to crawl before you walk there. I mean, geez.
Yeah, it's more about it is more about next year. And it's a guy they liked in the draft, and they saw an opportunity to get him for what they thought was a cheap price. And, yeah, they're going to take some hits because he's not going to contribute pretty clearly this year. But that story will, I think, be told in 2020 and to see if they're right. I mean, they like him as a pass rusher. I can't tell you if he can do anything because we haven't seen anything from him, essentially.
Real quick, some breaking news in the NFL as Josh Gordon has been suspended indefinitely for violating the NFL policy on performance-enhancing substances and substance of abuse. So that whole
two.
Sky
Not
is
just
also
one.
blue.
That's both.
Yeah, no, I said and
Right, but that needs to be repeated. That's like, wow,
Yeah.
it shocked your senses. It wasn't just one thing; it was both substances.
Yeah, well, for a lot of the people were saying, "Oh, should the Eagles have taken a shot on him?" And he didn't really do all that much with Seattle. He had a couple catches.
Might have been the difference, though.
But
I mean, they were
who knows?
second place when they got him, and they're in first place in the top seed now.
Yeah,
Maybe
well, they're not
they
going to
should-
have him the rest of the way.
They should
depends
test
what
everyone
you
else in
think.
that locker room.
There's two types of fans. They think the one type thinks Josh Gordon, that he was at the height in Cleveland, can't run nearly as well as he used to. He's going to get suspended, and so he just did, unfortunately. And they say the same thing with Antonio Brown. But even Des Bryant, Des Bryant can't run. But we talk about it all the time.
But he can give Antonio Brown words of wisdom.
Yeah, probably. Antonio's
That's scary.
one guy who can actually play still. But even there's no guarantee the NFL is not going to allow him.
Real
to
quick
play.
on that,
So-
because people have talked and asked about this. Antonio Brown, if you signed him, he is not eligible to play in a game, right?
No, technically he is. They haven't suspended him yet. They haven't
Right.
put him on the commissioner's exempt list. But one of the reasons why they haven't is because he's not signed, and they don't have to.
Right.
So the assumption that people will lean on that and say, well, he's available, not necessarily.
Not if they check his Twitter
And-
account.
Yeah. And just because he's not part of the league, so they don't have to suspend him.
Right.
If he becomes part of the league, and by the way, the league will make any team aware, if you're thinking about signing him, you're probably not going to be able to use him. So
Eagles, any interest in
might-
Janoris Jenkins?
I wouldn't think so at this point of the season.
Well, there's been a
come
lot
on.
of reports that he could play. There were some reports that he could play for a contending team as early as this week. That's why I know Jim Schwartz is probably not going to bench Mills and/or Darby to play a guy they just brought in.
No.
But
and you just know Jeffrey Lurie, and you look at why Janoris Jenkins is on the street and why he got cut for what he said. And Jeffrey Lurie's not bringing him in.
Right.
Not a chance in a million years.
well, any guy who has some name value, every Eagle fan wants.
Exactly.
So
And that's the point. And in fantasy football world or whatever, you don't have these other issues. You don't have these ancillary issues. So Josh Gordon's always Josh Gordon. You don't have to worry about it.
All right. Well, Jenkins was just claimed on waivers per a source. His new team has not been identified, but he was claimed.
I'm going to guess the Texans. That would be my guess.
So we'll keep an eye on that. Real quick, John, I want to give you a opportunity to comment on the Patriots situation with the video that was released by Jay Glazer and Fox.
Much ado about nothing. I've always said, one of the things about the Patriots over the 20 years that they've had success, and really not the entire 20 years, but probably the last 5 to 10 years, is they beat people before they ever get on the field because they're in your head. Anybody who's been on an NFL sideline, you got 40 seconds between plays. That's it. 25 seconds from a dead clock. What are you doing with signals? You're gonna steal signals and import them to your defense in 40 seconds or offense, whatever you're trying to do. If the Patriots can accomplish that, Godspeed.
John
If they can
McMullen
do it, nobody else can. Godspeed.
at JF McMullen. Of course, football at 4 every day on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Thank you, John.
Thank you, guys.